Hello everyone. Today I'm going to present about China's dual economic policy, the case study of Shenzhen. In 1979, Chinese premier leader at the time, Deng Xiaoping, decided to implement a historic policy called reform and opening up, which basically means China was ready to transform from a centrally planned economy to a market-driven one. Uh, they called it a socialist market economy. This marked the time when the Chinese government was ready to open its border and invite foreign investors to come into the country. Following this policy, the Chinese government strategically chose several areas in the country to set up special economic zones. So, a special economic zone is an area in the country in which the business and trade policies are different from the rest of the country in order to facilitate trade, employment, and FDI. A few examples of these favorable policies created by the government in order to attract foreign firms are no import and export duties, tax holidays, repatriation of full profits, which means that foreign firms are allowed to bring back the profits to their countries without having to pay tax. There's going to be provision of physical infrastructure by the Chinese government and an abundance of cheap labor. This is a picture of Shenzhen then and now. The difference between these two pictures is only about 3 decades, so this is a very impressive change in a very short amount of time. Let's take a look at a few numbers that show us the economic growth in Shenzhen. So Shenzhen started out as a small fishing village with only around 300,000 people. Currently, the city is a mega city with 20 million people. It has the third highest GDP in all Chinese cities, trailing only behind Beijing and Shanghai. In 2018, Shenzhen economy surpassed Hong Kong's economy for the first time, and back at that time, Hong Kong's were the 35th largest economy in the world, so this was a very impressive feat. The city was also voted world's second best city to visit by Lonely Planet magazine, and it is called Asia's Silicon Valley due to being home to major Chinese tech firms like Tencent and Huawei or ZTE. So the city follows the current trend of the world, which means that it focuses on lucrative high-tech industries including computer software, computer chips, electronics, telecom equipments, pharmaceuticals. Even though the economic growth in Shenzhen is very impressive, the city still faces with a lot of social problems. A few examples would be workers are being treated very badly by their foreign bosses. There has been reported suicide attempts happening at Foxconn iPhone factory, which is the biggest Apple's factory in the world. Um, Workers in this factory are forced to work 10 hours a day. They are not allowed to talk on production line. They have to live in dorms close to the factory so that they can show up to work on time. In order to qualify for overtime pay, a worker has to work 60 hours a week. And there's also a huge wealth gap in the city. An average middle class person in Shenzhen earns around 100,000 yuan per month, whereas migrant workers only earn on an average 4,000 yuan per month. Shenzhen is China's largest city of immigrants, and if you're a temporary resident in Shenzhen, life is very difficult for you. As a temporary resident, you don't have access to cheap education and healthcare, and have to pay a very large sponsoring fee in order to receive education and healthcare. Immigrant workers are paid only half the wage compared to permanent residents. Temporary residents cannot get travel permits to Hong Kong, and they do not have registered households. They have to live in slum areas. And the thing about living in slum areas is that whenever the government needs land to build new projects that can just force these uh, immigrant workers out of their houses, and there's nothing that these workers can do. With everything that was discussed about Shenzhen, I feel like historical materialism is a very good theory to apply here. Historical materialism basically says reduction is the condition of being human, and the histories of human depends on our desire to reduce more and more to support our existence. And historical materialism can study economic growth under under the scope of conflict between workers and owners, and how this conflict impacts the size of the economic surplus. The most important aspect of this conflict is probably workers' wages, and under the capitalist mode of production, workers' wages tend to decrease in order to maximize the size of the surplus. There are several ways to cut wages. A few examples would be wage cuts, increase prices of goods faster than wages, move operations overseas to low-wage countries, and because the workers' wages is squeezed to maximize the size of the surplus, there's a huge income gap in the society. Thanks a lot for listening to my presentation.